We are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. We let the people come in for minutes and then we start and dive in again for this webinar, Leading Without Authority. Welcome, Keith. Welcome,
Thank you.
Yuri.
I couldn't be more excited.
Is it your first European lockdown webinar?
Is it my first webinar? What?
European webinar?
No.
During the lockdown, I mean?
No, not at all. Not at all. I've been on, I was yesterday with a Russian group, and I've been in Asia. I love the fact that I can be in so many places, like teletransporting without having to get on an airplane. It's beautiful.
Did you prefer this? No, I don't think so.
I do.
You should do.
I do prefer it. I have more impact, and I have to tell you, I'm actually closer to you and seeing you right now than would be socially acceptable if I was standing with you, right?
That's what I mean. Yeah.
That would not be very appropriate if we were in face-to-face connection. So I get to be right there with you. The only problem is I wish the camera was in the middle of the screen, because I'm looking at you in the middle of the screen, but you know, my eyes are up there. That's the only challenge. They need to start creating computers with the camera in the middle of the screen, which I'm sure will happen soon.
It's true. Last week I had the former vice prime minister of the Netherlands, 88 years young, I say. And the first thing he said okay, I'm doing this for the first time, so I have to look into the camera. I said, you are the first speaker who is telling me that. Yes, you are right. Welcome everybody in the chat box. You are using it a lot already. Thank you. Let us know where you're from all over the world. The only button that you have to use when things are not working is in the top of your screen, the reconnection button. But I told you, I promise you, this is a very special one. It's the 18th webinar on the 18th of June. And I go back, I think it was 3 years ago that we met, Keith?
Yeah, it was 3 years ago, I think, in Boston.
In Boston, yeah. And you invited me for going higher together dinner, and that's where I fell in love with you.
Well, thank you.
That's really that was amazing, because we are a member. Hi, my name is Maurice van der Kamp. For the people who first joined this webinar, I'm the CEO of Asune Speakers and the founder of bookingworldspeakers.com. Our mission is improve collaboration, improve humanity in the speaking and event industry. And I think that's our match, Keith. Is it right? Yeah.
Well, I think it's not just the speaking industry. That's a beautiful conduit to make an impact on the world. And I think we both believe strongly in that. Yeah.
And you met Yuri, Yuri from Geest. Thank you for being the sidekick host. Keith, you shared with me a reference from Peter Diamandis. He already read your book, Leading Without Authorities. And Yuri is the co-author of the book Exponential Organizations. Yeah. He's the founder of the Singularity University Benelux. And I'm happy to have you here, Yuri. Thank you for being here.
Good to be here.
Yeah. And there's one thing that we also have in common. I was talking about the dinners, and we all three love having a great dinner. It's the first meeting. I had a first meeting with Yuri, handing over his book, Exponential Organizations, with me many years ago. And it was the best place to have dinner. So trust is the basic of having dinner. I'm living in Belgium, actually. So they do more dinners in Belgium. They spend more time for dinners and lunch than in the Netherlands. But yeah, you have a philosophy about that.
Well, you know, by the way, sono italiano. Mio padre è da Milano, nord di Milano. And I'm an Italian citizen. So I don't think the Dutch necessarily have a leg up on the Italians when it comes to the amount of time that we spend eating.
I know. Let us talk about that, Keith. I would first dive into your life story. From the moment, your background is Italian. Tell me more about it.
To do it, Italian American, of course, and my family came over from Italy, like many other families do, to the United States, and with a sense of opportunity, right? And one of the more important elements of opportunity for my father became his son, me, and making sure that I had opportunities that he didn't have available to him. And my father was a manual laborer. He worked in the construction industry when he wasn't working in the steel industry. And in the steel industry in the 1970s, which dates me, I'm 53 now, was falling down, and the steel industry was moving from America to Japan. And the American industry was closing down plants. And as a result of that situation, there were a lot of families like mine that ultimately were displaced and poverty stricken. At a certain point of time, the government even stopped taking care of the unemployed, even after the company stopped taking care. And the only thing that was available to us was what was called welfare cheese, which is a protein substitute that the government gave us. But what was most interesting and important, and the reason I guess that you asked me the question, was I would sit at my father's dinner table and I would hear him speak with a lot of remorse and shame about how he had ideas of why the company could do and how the company could do better. And yet the managers of the company weren't listening. They weren't attentive. In fact, sometimes they'd even tell my father, who was a good, strong, immigrant worker, to slow down because it made other workers look bad. And therefore the manager, if one worker did better than others, that would look like that manager wasn't bringing everybody up. Instead, they were asking him to come down. No wonder that the quality of our steel was being sent overseas. And I swore, I think I was 8 years old, I swore that I was going to remedy that situation. I was going to grow up someday and I was going to make sure that families did not have that same problem that we did and I never wanted to see a man as proud and as strong as my father feel ashamed of not having work. So that was my commitment. I thought I was going to be in politics. I thought I was going to grow up to be the governor of Pennsylvania and then president of the United States, and I was going to fix this problem. And I realized that I can fix this problem from a perch of commerce and from a perch of corporations. I believe that transforming work became my North Star. And that did. It happened at the dinner table. And all my life, I pursued whatever it would take to do that. I was the only person who graduated from Yale University. First of all, I was the first person in my family to graduate from college at all. And I was the only person to graduate from Yale University that went back to manufacturing. I went back to Pennsylvania and I was still committed after all of that time, from 8 years old until 21, I was going to go back in manufacturing. I did. And what I discovered, and I don't want to go on too long because the two of you are so brilliant, I want to make this very interactive. But what I discovered was that General Motors at the time was encouraging a new philosophy of improvement of business, and was called total quality management. And the basic core of that belief was that workers should be involved in the creation and the co-creation of their betterment of work process and quality. It's exactly what my father was saying back in the 70s. And now here we are, in the late 80s at this time. And I volunteered to lead the British chemical company that I was working for in Pennsylvania. I volunteered to lead that company's total quality management system. And I was down at the plant working with men like my father and women like my father who were redefining the quality of their work. And that became a pivotal point to me. And the new book that I'm writing now, Leading Without Authority, I realize the importance, the critical importance of engaging people in the workforce to accelerate and to create growth in business. Now, Yuri, I see. Looks like some technical problems. We've lost our host, but hopefully
we can do it.
If we keep going, we'll be fine, and he'll catch up with us, right?
Yeah.
But Yuri, when Peter came along and your work came along and helped me understand the critical need to not think 10% improvement, but 100% improvement, and realizing that it takes just as much time to be exponential as it does to be incremental. It was a beautiful match because Peter's philosophy of exponentialism and abundance matched with my philosophy of workforce co-creation. And the word that I created over time, I call it coelevation, a commitment of people to go higher together. And so, I guess this, I coach Peter's team, over at XPRIZE and in his new company, Kovacs, as well, which is doing extraordinary things in immunology. And it's been a great marriage. Yeah.
He's an amazing person, very inspirational. I like to work a lot, XPRIZE, as you Abundance, the book. Yeah.
Yeah. And also, but I was just to catch you up just a bit, Maurice, because you abandoned us, my friend, for a bit of time.
I'm always like that, Geest.
So the focus, I was just landing on the fact that what I learned at the table of my father, then I perfected over a lifetime of work associated with how can the organization, how can we unleash value from the organization itself, right? And how can the people, the human capital, the teams in an organization transform value? And the punctuation I'll just end with, which is very prideful to me. We were invited into General Motors when they were coming out of bankruptcy. Now, my dad was a United Auto Workers steel worker. General Motors was the organization that told my manufacturing company that I was working for that we needed to adopt a new philosophy of TQM. I studied at General Motors when I did that. And then spin ahead until after bankruptcy, I was invited in as a thought leader and as a coach to the General Motors organization to help them in their transformation after bankruptcy. And the CFO of General Motors, who was a part of that initiative, and I say the CFO because there's nobody more cynical than a CFO. The CFO of General Motors said that this philosophy of coelevation was one of the primary reasons that they didn't go back into bankruptcy. It's what a beautiful cycle. I cried when I heard that. Literally, I cried when I heard that because I couldn't imagine anything more prideful to me. My father was no longer alive. But if I had gone back to my dad and be able to explain to him that the stories he told me as an 8-year-old at his table came around and helped to transform the industry that he was a part of from the very beginning. So it was beautiful. Thank you.
We lost Maurice again, it seems. But anyway, I have a question. If you look at total quality management, right, TQM in the 80s, 90s, and I saw this myself during my university, college, period. So how do you think things have changed? Because there was 20 years ago, 30 years ago, and it seems to be a little bit more rigid, more formalized than what's happening today. So how do you see this shift in the last years in terms of organizations and quality?
I think a couple of things. First of all, as I mentioned earlier, the work that Peter and you all brought to the table, which is recognizing that the pressures from technology, the pressures from technology-enabled competition, and the pressures from the marketplace themselves, your consumers, your customers, who demand much more. And I think heavily contributed is the venture-funded organizations that now allow startups with a lot of capital, not necessarily unlimited, but perhaps a lot of capital, to compete in a world where they're not held to the same standards as others are in terms of earnings and month-to-month return. So this crazy amount of pressure now put on organizations requires you to meet them with exponential thinking and with something that we call radical adaptability. So I marry what Peter talks about around exponential outcomes. I marry that to radical adaptability, which is really the adoption of agility, monthly, weekly sprints, right, to the way you work, and being able to fulfill exponentialism, which is the hurdle that you have talked about, but adding to that the agility piece, the pivoting, the constant movement to assure you're in the right direction. But the third piece to this is this philosophy of coelevation. Now, coelevation is important for a distinct reason. In the 80s and 90s, there were systems that started to come into corporations that changed the dynamic of work. In the 70s and 80s, a division of a company had a lot of autonomy. The Italian branch of a global company had its own marketing, had its own HR, had its own purchasing and supply chain. It had everything. And financially, it probably only had its money scraped from the local banks on a monthly basis, I would imagine. And then SAP comes along, which was at the time the most dominant. There were others. SAP comes along. And at the time I was at Deloitte watching this happen. I was not yet the chief marketing officer. I was running the sales and marketing practice at Deloitte. And I watched this company, SAP, but others come along. And what I realized was that they just toppled the shift of control from geographic division, which had a lot of autonomy and control, to centralized authority, because the supply chain could now be global and everything could be managed. The financial systems were global. They took the monies every day back, right? And recalculated what they were going to be giving out. Marketing policies, HR policies, as HR got added to the global systems. So what happened was you had silos and a small central function. Now the small central function became a matrix. So HR ran across global, marketing ran across global, supply chain ran across global, and these folks, which were regional, right, had an interface. They had to work with this. That created 20 to 30 years of fighting in organizations, and that interface called the matrix, right here, led a lot of executives ask the question, who has authority, who has control? And they fought for authority and control constantly. And the pendulum would swing as to who had authority and control, whether it was central function or divisions and silos. So that has eroded that fight has eroded more shareholder value by having executives' attention on internal turf and achieving, because the assumption was, and understandable, the assumption was if I got more turf, I could be exponential. And I just needed to fight internally to get more control and authority in order for me to meet these exponential demands. But that's wrong-headed. And I've come along with a book, and I've been coaching this way in executive teams. I've been coaching this way for 20 years. But I finally come along with a book to match it, which is no. You're fighting for control and authority inside of the organization is stealing from shareholders, because every damn ounce of time you put to fighting for control and authority and more resources is time you should have been put to earning the right to co-create exponentialism. And that's a lot of bullshit consulting words. Let me unpack that. You should have been working harder. If you're the chief marketing officer, instead of trying to get sales support to report to you, and instead of trying to get data and analytics out from underneath the strategy group to report to you, bullshit. There are 5 fundamental areas that control growth in the business: product, sales, marketing, data and analytics, right? And so these, and then lead generation, and the areas of marketing that are much more campaign oriented. These various areas, your job is not to worry about what you control. Your job is to be the Sherpa and the leader without authority that allows a brilliant set of individuals to create exponentialism. And then what I do in the book is I teach people what that process is. Chapter 1, it gets people to understand who's your damn team. Your team is not who reports to you. Your team is who you need to get the job done. I don't care about org charts. They're irrelevant. Stop fighting for the matrix and start stepping into your power of a leader in an organization. And the real leader in an organization, which is leader of vision, passion, and ideas and the co-creation. And look, if you believe in diversity and inclusion, if you believe that more input gets exponential output, which is I know you do, Yuri, with your work around crowdsourcing and all those kind of things you do. If you believe in that, then your job is to embrace a broader team. And we teach how to do that in this book, as well as how do you earn the right to lead and how do you, et cetera. So there's lots around that. I don't know, Yuri, does that answer your question?
Yeah, I like it. So, but I'm wondering, so you talk about co-elevation. I like it. I wonder what kind of organizations and what kind of employees are mostly suitable for this kind of philosophy. What are
great. So, first of all, I think all humans, because as Maurice will say, we are all animals of the human species seeking our tribes. I know that Maurice believes that. And my job and what I've been doing for the last 20 years is helping awaken teams to realize that they're not sitting as coexisting members of a group trying to get things done, which is what most teams do. Some teams sit as competitive members of a group trying to get things done, right? I mean, that's the worst part, but most sit in coexistence. I try to get to group, and what I coach my teams to do is I coach my teams to realize that they are sitting as a tribal unit and they're responsible for getting across the finish line together. Sort of like the US Marines, we don't leave anyone behind. That's not the way executive teams function. Executive teams function where I'm across the line and I'm looking back at sales and saying, hurry up. Or I'm whispering to the CEO that marketing is not doing their job, right? Instead of stopping, reassessing resources and going back and pulling my brethren across the line so that we all cross the finish line together in a co-elevating team. Your question of what kind of person is the right person for that, we all long for that as humans. That's how we were born 70,000 years ago. It is not, however, how we're conditioned as executives today, right? So there is a reboot, which I bring in our coaching. I bring a reboot and a challenge in my speaking engagements. I challenge a team. I challenge an organization. I challenge leaders to awaken to, frankly, the lack of integrity on how they're behaving today. We have a diagnostic that we will sometimes do in a large format when I'm giving speaking engagements, and it's wonderful now in a remote environment. It's so easy to use these tools, right? It's so fun to be in a remote environment giving a leadership talk and then be able to do a quick poll and then do the poll and show things like, number one, 70% of teams do not believe they get value from being a member of the team, right? 74% of people on teams do not believe they have the permission to challenge each other in the room, right? So, and only of leaders, right? Only 2 out of 5 leaders believe they have a high-performing team. So there is this entity called a team, which I believe is significantly under-curated. We do work at the strategic level, and we dive down into the role, and the organism of a team is missed. Now, back to to land your question again, Yuri, I'm working around it to what kind of human. I'll be honest, and this will shock Maurice a bit. I kind of don't care if you love each other. I don't care if you love each other. Now, I do, but I'm going to be a little bombastic on this. You take a look at organizations. Ray Dalio runs a company. He wrote a book called Principles. He runs an organization that encourages vicious challenging. He runs an organization that encourages audacious candor, right? Cutting people out from underneath each other for giving each other feedback. By the way, that's what Microsoft used to be too, right? And that's what Oracle has been known to be. And I have to tell you that it worked. It works. Those organizations are successful. They don't hold each other hands. They don't love each other, right? But it works. Why does it work? Because they hire assholes. And it's okay if, and I'll change the language, but if you hire extraordinary, resilient people who have a social contract to be highly accountable, give each other feedback, push each other, be highly candid, right? That works beautifully. But if you go to the Midwest of the United States or you go to France, right, and you try to do that, you will shut people down and you'll get lower productivity. In a world where the average human who is insecure, triggered, difficult, challenging, if you put those kind of individuals in a room, then to be the accountable, challenging individual, the elements of high performance, the criticality, the challenging, you better build the relationship that earns you permission. So that's when you need to be loving. That's when you need to be generous. That's when you need to be caring. Because if you don't build that foundation of relationship, then you will not earn the permission to push each other in high performance. Unless you hire for that social contract, which is very difficult to do. I think Amazon is struggling with that because at the top of the house with Jeff and Andy and all the group at the top of Amazon, they have that contract. They have that respect. And I think in some ways I think that they think they're doing a beautiful job, and I think they are. But at some level, when you're at that scale, you've got to start adopting principles and practices that don't assume you have permission to be hard charging, challenging, et cetera, because not everybody has that permission with each other. So the answer is we all long for it, but we do have to earn permission with the average human that's frail like I am and insecure like I am. You need to love on me a little bit before you can tell me I got my head up my butt.
I like your explanation. My personal experience of this the last few years. So if you build a new team or organization, it's very important to focus on the emotional, social, and the spiritual parts, physical part as well. Right, and I think that's changing now over time, and more in terms of Lalu, team organizations. I think that's already happening today, and in line with your reasoning, right? So, coelevation is basically an organization as a biological organism, right, with distributed sense-making, decision-making, responsibility, co-leadership. I strongly believe in that, but I do believe that there's a nuance, right? So you have the classic hierarchy. And then you have self-organizing teams without any manager or without the project manager. And there's also some stuff in between, right? Sometimes you have a self-organized team with a project manager or with a manager, right? So there's some nuance there. What are your thoughts around that?
So Tony Hsieh from Zappos, as you know, he's very famous for his investment and work in holacracy and self-managed teams, etc. He's also, interestingly, a part of the Amazon organization. They were acquired by Amazon, the company Zappos. And it's a very successful company that the reason they let Tony experiment like they do is they believe that Tony may be coming up with new ways to break through scaling the organization. Because Amazon's got to do that. Amazon is growing with such speed that they've got to figure out new models. Now, what Tony said about coelevation, let me see if I can read it here. He said, "I'm excited to bring coelevation, both as a new word, a new book, and as a concept to Zappos to help bring our culture and our business to the next level." He said that because as he sees, when you start creating a marketplace for organizational dynamics like holacracy, it can actually slip into transactionalism. People can begin to organize and self-organize and look at what's in it for them too quickly. And as a result, they start losing what Zappos had at the beginning, which was the heart of the Zappos culture. And that degradation needed to be replaced with a reacclimation that we are in this together, that I may be negotiating with you for resources in a self-organizing environment, but we have a shared commitment to a mission, and we have a shared commitment to each other. Let's not forget that. That's what coelevation is. It's a group of individuals committed to a mission, but then committed to elevating each other. And if you're committed to elevating each other, you're not just holding hands and making each other's relationships and energy strong, which is important, but you're also, if you're really committed to elevating each other, then you're committed to giving each other feedback. You're committed to challenging each other. You would never allow your children to go unchallenged and without feedback, because you're elevating these children. You love them and you want them to get better. You would want your friends to get better. Now, one of the things I have to say, I actually noticed that in my relationships with friends, I had to assure that I infused coelevation into the relationship. Too many of our friends actually tell us what we want to hear. They enjoy the social acclimation with us, but they don't necessarily pressure test the relationship by telling us when they think we're off base, right? I mean, it happens too often. Only your dearest friends. And I want to bring coelevation into a mindset that approaches all relationships. My original intention of writing the book wasn't what it ended up being, which is a formula for breaking down silos in organizations and building high-performing teams. That's what this book is about. But the original idea was that I believed that there was something missing there was something that I wanted to bring more to the forefront in every relationship contract, whether it's spouses or friends or work associates. I wanted there to be a commitment to each other's success to the point of being willing to challenge and coach each other.
It sounds like that amazing book by Reid Hoffman, The Alliance, but then at a broader scale, right?
Yeah. I mean, Reid and I remember meeting Reid when he was building LinkedIn for the first time. I had just, he was building LinkedIn. I had just published Never Eat Alone. I was the networking guy. He was building the networking platform, and we met. And then subsequently, I wrote Never Eat Alone, and he started working book about managing, networks and organizations, et cetera. So we've always been in parallel. He just made a lot more money doing it than I did. He figured out how to scale quicker. If I had been smart at the time, I would have respected his capacity to scale and invested in LinkedIn.
He had a better network. The PayPal mafia is pretty significant.
Let me already share a question in the chat with you, Keith. And sorry, I went away 2 times. Just throw the challenges to you. But, thank you for the question. Leading without authorities requires for a leader a leader with guts in terms of having best people or talents around him or her. Or do you see it in another way?
I see it in very much a different way on both of those fronts. I don't believe it requires guts. It requires humility. And I don't believe you have to have the best people around you. I believe you have to make the best of the people who are around you. And so I think the old model requires guts, heroism, authority, dominance, those words, very Germanic kind of words, right? I believe those words are very much important in the old authority mindset. However, I believe that in the new mindset, there's an elasticity that you have to build with the people around you. And you also have to recognize, because you don't have control and authority, you have to build influence. And there's a chapter in the book, which I actually created a word for this. It was a word that I learned when I was working for this chemical company right out of college. And it's a word applied to a molecule. A molecule is porous, or it's not porous. There's a porosity, an absorptiveness. This glass has less porosity. It's not absorptive, right? Whereas the paper here is more porous, right? It will absorb. So I started thinking about models for measuring the success of really, there's an element of what I'm talking about, which is change management. I don't want to use those words, because traditional change management means training and development. The traditional change management means if I teach you something and you know it, then that, of course, you will go do it. But we know that doesn't happen. Awareness and understanding does not yield action. If that were, I have turned my old drinking habit, which was a glass or two of wine a night, right, to a drinking habit that I measure in bottles, not glasses. In the lockdown, my family will polish off a bottle and a half an evening, and sometimes I'm like, I'm the only one drinking. But put that aside. And my point is, I know it's not right, but I do it anyway. So knowledge isn't change human behavior. What changes human behavior? We've got to measure the openness and the porosity of a human. So there's a wonderful chapter in the book, chapter 2, serve, share, and care. Serve, share, and care are the keys to open up porosity in another human. So the question was, do I need guts? No, you need the capacity to lead with service that arrests a human's awakening to say, oh, wait a second, this person's here for me. And then you need to follow with authenticity and yes, vulnerability, because then that solidifies loyalty and trust. It quiets the reptilian brain of a person who used to think of you potentially as a competitor or as a resource threat, and now turns that person into a partner or a team member. And then you build that authentic care, which solidifies the sustainability of it. So it's not guts, and it's not having the best people. It's the ability to open porosity. And then when you do, you say to the people, we all need to get better. None of us are good enough. One of the exercises I do with executive teams is I make them raise their hand and I say, in order for us to meet the crazy changes in the marketplace, what percentage does each of us need to grow as a leader? Either hard skills, knowing AI, machine learning, soft skills, leadership competencies, etc. What percentage do we need to change? Before pandemic, the average number was 20%. Now, when I do this exercise, the average number is 50%. So literally, senior leaders are randomly assigning a number, just saying directionally they believe they need to be 50% different and better. Now, when I say that, I say, raise your hand if you agree with that number. I get the whole team to raise their hand to agree with whatever the number is. I don't care if it's 15 or 50. They raise their hand. And I say, great. Now keep your hand up. Look around. Whose job is it to get the rest of those people there? And let's have a dialogue about that. And that's the dialogue where you begin to change the social contract of a team that used to be, it is my job to get me there and maybe my boss to get me there, right? And yet, what if the team took responsibility for co-elevation to getting you there? That is a different social contract. It doesn't exist. Those leaders are not responsible for getting each other to a higher level of performance. They're just not. They're just not. But they need to be. For us to meet Yuri's exponential targets, this team has got to grow exponentially, and they can't do it alone. And the boss can't be running around playing whack-a-mole. The boss doesn't even see these people in action. The only people that see these people in action are their peers on networked teams outside of the boss's eye. So whose job is it to coach us? It's our peers. And that is a whole different contract, which there's a whole chapter in the book around co-development. And it's different. Feedback, for instance, Maurice, if I give you feedback, I would say, if I were your boss, I'd say, I give you feedback, and you would take feedback knowing that it was a directive. And you would struggle with it because you would know that you had some obligation to accept it, right? That's how we've always given feedback. Mm-hmm. But Yuri, right, who is, let's say, a peer in the team, if Yuri's a peer and I want to give him feedback, it's a whole different contract, because I cannot, number one, if I gave him feedback in the old form as a directive, he would say, screw you, because I have no authority over him. Mm-hmm. I've got to earn the right to give feedback to Yuri. And there's a whole process by which you earn the right to give feedback to a peer. One of the aspects is not assuming Yuri will accept it, which is a whole point, which is part of the issue of giving good feedback, is to realize that it's not your job to force someone to change. It's your job to care enough to tell them what you think and offer them new data. Now, that pivot of a contract in how to give peer-to-peer feedback versus authoritative feedback, where it's given and should be received as a directive, it's fundamentally different. And I'm able to do now with my teams, I coach my teams to coach each other. So that when I leave, my team is coaching each other. And the boss isn't the coach, the team is the coach, including the team is the coach of the boss. I run an exercise that I talk about in the Leading Without Authority book called an open 360. We should not be giving feedback to each other behind each other's back to the HR department anonymously. We should be giving feedback openly in a caring environment and expecting each other to rise with that feedback. And there's a methodology to do that, which we've never been taught. That's why Adam Grant says this is the only book that actually teaches us how to work in networks, as opposed to the traditional authority structure that we're all still using. And it doesn't work. It's new.
So can you give us a few examples of companies doing this already today? The name?
Yeah, I do. National Instruments is doing a beautiful job of it. It's a technology company out of Austin. There are, and I think actually General Motors under Mary Barra's leadership has really embraced these principles very nicely. I would say that parts of organizations that I have seen and researched and been a part of, like Verizon and different parts of their organization, has done it. And here's the beauty of this. Organizations don't have to do this. Just people do.
Starts with people.
It starts with a single person, which is, I wrote the book, I could have written the book as an organization design, like Holacracy is written. Holacracy is written, it's like, if the company doesn't do it, nobody does it. Like it's an agreement of an organization. Leading without authority can be put in the hands of any one individual who wants to become a leader without authority and operate in this new system. I wrote the book not assuming that I was going to replace traditional org design, nor was I assuming that you would adopt holacracy. Those things are irrelevant to me. I'm giving you a set of personal guidelines on how you lead in networks, how you lead in a world where you can't control, and therefore where you can lead. And the fun thing about it is I can actually help you lead outside of the boundaries of your own company, including leading with your clients. The product development cycle should include your clients. It's not even an internal project. I call it teaming out. Your team is whoever you need to get the job done, which might include people that you clearly don't have control over, which may be the people you're selling to. And how do you make that team? And there's a whole mindset. I gave you another mindset shift. We used to have the team that worked for us that we controlled, and then we had others we had to get buy-in from, right? I hate the word buy-in. The word buy-in assumes that I'm selling you something, right? We used to have these fake collaborative engagements where we would go out under the auspice of collaboration to sell you something with not really caring what you're saying. I just want to check a box that I included you to the point where I've sold you on what I wanted to do. That's old school collaboration. It's one form of old school collaboration. I go through the models of collaboration in the book and I shoot up why these old models don't work. On the other hand, there's the chapter in the book where I talk about this woman, Sandy, who had she had a job to do. There was a person who was obstructionist in her mindset, and she was battling this person. She was trying to apply policy control over this person. She was frustrated with this person. This person was her nemesis. And literally in one coaching engagement with this woman, I got her to fundamentally see that she was a shitty leader. Because this woman that she thought of as an obstructionist was actually a team member that she was not attending to. Once she realized that, and we coached through how she could approach somebody and reverse a bad relationship and turn them into a co-creator, this person ended up being with the best partner she had, and the two of them succeeded extraordinarily. But you can easily see how that happens in companies all the time when you're just ingrained in a mindset of old form collaboration.
Keith, going back a bit, you were 8 years young.
Maurice has taken us back. Maurice promised, he said, by the time you're done with this, he's going to have me he's going to have me lying on the couch and crying. That's what he said to me. He said, that's my job. I'm going to have you lying on the couch crying.
No, but with my life, I now since a few years know what my mission is.
Yeah.
When I connected with my history in youth, I connect my mission through my whole journey in life. So is it the same with you, Keith, and with Yuri? Did you know when you look back into your life, and I come back to another question of Alexandra about education and children, and you have two children now, Keith? Two?
Well, I have a whole new philosophy about children that I want to tell you about. I've recently adopted a number of other kids, which I'll tell you about. But Yuri, why don't you answer that question? I'm tired of hearing myself talk.
Sure.
You go back with your mission.
Yeah, so
you're a North Star there.
I've been involved with Singularity since 10 years ago, so I knew about purpose, right? That's why I chose it back then. So, but the process for personal purpose has been a long journey. And what helped me a lot, many things, by the way, meditation, but I walked into nature in India for a week, 18 months ago. It's a long story, but it was the most profound experience in my whole life. In the poorest parts of India, there was nothing, no bed, shower, just meditation and walking in nature. And what I realized that at the end of the journey, there was an exercise. Okay, what's the pattern in your life between 0 and 7, 7 and 14, 14, 21, 21, 35, and above? Like the biggest highlights and biggest traumas or disappointments, right? And afterwards, you have to select a pattern, right? Business, private, whatever, right? What comes to mind. And the thing that came to mind for me was rejection, right? It was a pattern for different reasons. And then I realized later on that what I was doing was the inversion of rejection. That is inclusion. So I'm heavily involved in social cohesion, right? Already for a few years. So I already did it intuitively, my purpose. So then I realized your karma, your pain is your dharma, your purpose. And I in all the cells in my body 18 months ago, right? And I live it. Also as a DJ, social cohesion. It's the same. One is rational, writing books, talks. Other is emotional, spiritual. It's the same. It's about connecting people, right? Social cohesion. So to transform, like an alchemist, like a phoenix, I transformed my karma, rejection, into my purpose, cohesion. And then I realized, and then I quit later on in this same walk, that there was an ancestral element of rejection, like 3 generations ago with my father and my mother. So then I realized, oh shit, this is ancestral healing I'm doing for my own kids and their kids and their kids and their kids. So I have to transform the chain in my own life, not for myself, but energetically as a light being for the whole lineage, right? And whole humanity as well. And I felt that energy. And that was a transformative moment. Because you can think about purpose, you can read about purpose, but that visceral, existential, super fundamental feeling will never leave you again, right? And that's what I'm doing.
Yuri, have you ever used tools like shamanistic practices, plant medicine, those additional tools to help you get that centeredness?
It's the same, but this was all organic, and there was nothing all natural, organic. But both.
So I've done, you and I clearly, the label I would put on you, not that you want a label, but the label I put on you is that of a seeker. And I believe I'm a seeker. And I think my seeking is, maybe you've suggested, but for me, my seeking comes from wounds that I'm trying to heal, and that I'm so happy that I'm awakened enough to know that I have wounds that I'd like to heal, but at the same time to know that I don't need to heal them, in that, I'm good enough as it is. And that's a lifelong journey to figure that out, right? And I'm sure I'd love to have a discussion just on that. And maybe we will in a moment. But
Yeah, you have another meeting at 20 minutes.
But the yeah, so for me, I think the mission that I knew from a very early age was, and I'm going to say it how a young boy felt it.
Mm-hmm.
I felt that I was broken and that I wanted to be better, or I wanted to be enough, and that I didn't want other people to feel that way, and that in my own healing, I wanted to help heal others. That's what I felt as a kid. And a lot of that had to do with socioeconomic disparity. We were very poor. My father got me into rich schools. I didn't feel like I deserved to be there. The very things that my father was bringing to me that he wanted me to aspire to achieve made me feel less than, right? Our immigrant parentage and the desire to assimilate. I mean, all of those kind of things going on in my head. So I decided I wanted to have a lifetime journey to heal. And I really felt that I didn't want other people to suffer, and I wanted to have a lifetime journey to help others. I didn't say this earlier, I said I wanted to be a politician. I did. Before I wanted to be a politician, I wanted to be a preacher, because the only model I had when I was a little boy of somebody who could help somebody that had that energy that I thought was loving and the kind of energy that I hoped I had, instead of the disappointed, angry, wounded energy that I was experiencing, was my minister from when I was a little kid, who sort of took me under his wing and gave me good coaching and counseling. My dad said I was absolutely forbidden from being a minister because they didn't make enough money. And so I went down a path, and what I joke now, it's like, secular or non-secular aside, I have my wish in that my work is to help humans co-elevate, and I get to do that 5 days a week, not just one. So if I were like the doctor who was my minister, I'd have him 1 day a week. But I get to help people rise to be their best selves in order to create shareholder value, and I love it. I actually like the metric, because I like to be able to measure value creation along with elevation of human capital and souls, because it feels to me like I know when I'm making movement in doing it. Yeah, so I've always had that mission from a very early age. And I'm still.
It's beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful to see that. And I come back to the question Alexandra has. Is it not crucial to start with our general education system? In the Netherlands, most education, secondary education, is trained to be a manager instead of being a team player committed to a better company, work environment. Thank you for the question, Alexandra.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm taking this in baby steps. Here's how I've applied the principle of coelevation. I apply it in organizations today. As soon as I get into an organization deeply enough, I ask whether I can have permission to serve their nonprofit efforts. So I remember working with General Motors to bring these principles to kids in Detroit, right? I personally, when I find friends who have passions of movements they're trying to create, I act as a coach to them, and I give my effort for free. Peter doesn't pay me to be his coach, because I believe in Peter's work as important to the world. So I want to coach Peter to help him utilize these aspects to expand his work. The World Bank, we have been coaching the World Bank around the world to help the different branches of the World Bank co-elevate with governments, co-elevate with NGOs, and co-elevate with local private capital and family offices to eradicate poverty. And we have seen acceleration of funding and bringing capital to the mission of the World Bank to eradicate poverty. We have seen it radically accelerate when the individuals in the World Bank running in in Nepal, where those individuals adopt coelevation as their strategy instead of the old philosophy, which is, more of a philosophy of bring us your RFPs and we will decide what to fund. But when you get off of the pedestal and you co-create projects and opportunities with those groups, it's transformative. Now, I've also gone to Israel and Palestine and taught coelevation on both sides of the border to kids that want to go to the street to advocate for peace. Because if you could either go to the street in Palestine or go to the street in Israel and advocate for adopting my opinion, or you can have a very different approach, which is an invitation to create a better world, right? That how do you position your collaboration? Is it I've got an idea and I'm selling you on it, which is the traditional way to do it, or are you going to co-create with an individual? So we've applied this in all ways. My worry, and I'm glad Maurice is back because I'd like to ask both of you this question. My worry, so we've been applying coelevation everywhere, including governments. I'm not going to say the name of the government, but we were brought in to help a government co-elevate with the entrepreneurial environment to move that government from a more autocratic system to a much more westernized philosophy of democracy and capital and capitalism in the best way. Now, my question for both of you is, I think what's happening right now with the pandemic, because we're in the middle of it, I don't know when you're going to watch this, but we're seeing certainly nationalization rise as we've been for a while. And I believe that the belief that I have, and Yuri, I know you have, we both probably, despite our citizenships, we're global citizens. And how do we, I think all the more reason for coelevation to become a mainstay of our conversation, because I'm deeply afraid of the localization and the movement that's beginning to occur that I don't think is going to help the world advance. So I don't know.
I agree. Same thing. I'm a little bit optimistic. The way to tackle it is first you have to acknowledge why people are becoming more nationalistic, and there's a reason or reasons for that. The reason for that is that the old elite or the current elite didn't pay attention, became too complacent, self-absorbed, disconnected from reality. No skin in the game, right? Nassim Taleb. So what people want in an exponential era of change, soon quantum exponential on top of exponential, right?
Yeah.
And that scares me. So what happened? I'm living already in this reality, right? So what will happen? People will look for an anchor, a stability point. Right now, all the nationalists, they offer an outlandish way back to the past as an anchor, right? Stability point for these people. While the current elite and the old elite should offer a future-oriented anchor. And people like Peter now, just let's say a vision, a purpose, an anchoring point into the future that's about ecological and social inclusiveness and a higher level of consciousness for all, right? I'm doing this myself now on a small scale, private contemplating tribe and other stuff. It's growing more than exponential, so it's happening. But it will be a time issue, right? The rise of nationalism will increase, but there's also this new future-proof movement growing, groundswell globally, not just us, or it's a big movement, right? So it will be a challenging time. I expect a big systemic transformation in the next 5 years. After that, it will be amazing, but the next 5 years will be very intense.
Yeah.
Maurice, how much time do we have on this? I want to, what's that?
Yeah, a few minutes, because your next meeting is in about 10 minutes, and we can do another webinar, Keith. We can do another webinar.
What
do you think? What do you think those? I mean, there's so many questions. Maybe one of the things you could do is export the questions to me, and maybe I could just riff off answers, and Yuri could riff off answers on a video, and you can send them out to people. It might be fun for us to do that.
Thank you. Yeah.
And the other thing is just, I would love, if you don't mind, to let people know how to stay in touch with this conversation with me. Because there's something I've just started I want to tell people about. There's been more disruption in the last 3 months than I've seen in 20 years. And I like it.
Me too.
Now, I have friends and family who are suffering a lot at this time. So I'm not saying I like that. I understand I've got to be sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
But I like the disruption and I like the innovation. And I like what's happening. But yet I started hearing people talk about going back to work. And I'm fearful that there is a possibility of slipping back into the old mindsets and old ways of being because they're so comfortable. And we've worn them for so long, despite the disruption, because the disruption was painful. So I've started an effort that I call Go Forward to Work. And it's going to be launched next week. And it'll be goforwardtowork.com. I'm working on it in conjunction with Harvard Business Review and Harvard Business School. And I've hired the former managing editor of Forbes. I've got the editor of Brand Week. And we've got hundreds of executives now agreeing to work together to co-create a formula for what the future of work is by category. And I would just ask that people who want to be a part of this, who believe that they have seen things in their workplace that they are proud of, that they would like to pause and tell that story so that others can share. We have been innovating with our head down, and it's time to look up and say, hey, wait, here's what I've been doing around remote team leadership. Here's what I've been doing around wellness in the workplace. Here's what I've been doing to rethink my supply chain relationships. Here's what I've been doing around digital acceleration. So we're compiling that. It's going to be a book of mine that I'm writing in the spring. And it's going to be a massive research project that we've started already. So if you want to be a part of that, I would just ask that you reach out to me with these stories. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn directly, which is fine. You could reach out to me at my direct email address on my website, keithferrazzi.com. But to me, I want to co-create a future that is going to leverage this inflection point and not let us go back, but to go forward to work. The other thing, just as a small point, so keithferrazzi.com is probably the best place in general. The small point is, if you're managing a remote work, I think there's a great opportunity to leverage the being in remote to make your team better than it was when it was not.
Yeah.
And I created an entire focus called virtualteamswin.com. And I've got $2 million worth of research we've done on how do you lead a remote organization there. So I would invite you to go there too. So those are resources. Those are ways to stay in touch that hopefully you'll follow and you'll find us. And then of course, Leading Without Authority is I think my greatest work, even more so than the book everybody knows me for. So
the book, and you can help and assist Yuri how to write a book, how to write his next book, because for you it took you.
Yuri knows how to write a book. Yuri knows how to write a book.
Yeah, but a good book. Nowadays you see too much.
Kidding me?
No. What I mean is,
it's extraordinary. I love his book around exponential. Everybody should get it. Absolutely.
Yeah. Keith, thank you, because this webinar I had so many questions, but you were only talking and Yuri was only talking, and I thought, grab a cup of coffee. So I was gone for 3 times. So I still have so many questions, and thank you for having you on this very special webinar. And thank you for also for joining us from all over the world. We had Colombia, we had Germany, we had South Africa, Greece, many countries from all over the world. And I just must say, but buy the book, that's one. And commit to Keith, because it's much needed, this new leadership of co-elevation. Start with that mission and believe in each other. Keith, thank you. Yuri, thank you. On Tuesday is Internet of Energy, the Internet of Energy. That's his mission. So I brought those two together to make impact, and that's what we call coelevation. Is it, Keith?
Maurice, anything you're involved in is called coelevation. You're one of the most beautiful souls, and you're just making such a big impact in the world.
Give me your bank account, I'll pay you. Thank you so much for your nice word. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Good luck.
Okay, bye-bye everyone. Bye-bye.